If you believe the opinion polls and the nowcast and all the other bits and pieces, then you'll know the east of England looks like it's in a mass revolt against the Conservatives, and it's going to be a very good area for reform in the future. There's a number of councils in the east of England region that are up for election in 2026. Most of them should be going ahead, as far as we know, and we're going to see in this video what happens in the east of England. Now, we're going to start, as you can see, looking at Epping Forest. I thought that's topical, seeing it's been in the news a lot, obviously, in the last year with the Bell Hotel, the protests about the asylum seekers and all that. So Epping Forest is where we will start, obviously down in Essex. So they're electing by thirds in Epping, so obviously that limits the scope of how much can change. There's 18 seats up for election. The Conservatives are defending 11 of those, and you need 28 seats for a majority. So, all to say, the Conservatives are only 2 seats away from majority in Epping Forest. So, if there is a Conservative comeback, this would be the place where you might see it, because 2 seats gets them a majority and turns this council blue. Is that likely? I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Let me know what you think in the comments, because as far as the protests and all the controversy over the hotel in Epping, the council was the one. They were against the government on this, and the government was pushing for this hotel obviously to keep operating, and eventually won. Although I think there's still legal proceedings ongoing. So the council were against this. So let's see how that plays out in this election. Do the Conservative councillors here get rewarded, or is the frustration with the system so great that people turn to reform sort of en masse? You can see there's also a large localist presence on this council, in fact the second most by quite a way. So we see what happens with them. Sometimes they retain their seats quite comfortably. Other times they go to the insurgent parties like Reform and the Greens, and in this part of the world you'd expect it to be Reform. Let's see what happens with them. But yeah, look, if there is this Conservative revival, Epping Forest is going to be a place that turns blue, because they're only 2 seats away from having that majority. But I think another thing that colours our thinking on this is that in 2016, going back 10 years, there was 2 UKIP members in Epping Forest as well. So this is an area that was partial to voting UKIP. Reform is a lot more popular than UKIP ever was at the moment. So perhaps, again, that's an insight into the fact that Reform have a pretty good chance of taking a number of seats in Epping. Like I say, a third up for election, so limited scope in terms of what can actually change. I mean, if the Conservatives were to have a disaster of a night, if things change between now and May and they just keep slipping down back into the teens, look, with them defending 11, you'd say that Reform are best placed to pick those up. So look, worst case scenario, Conservatives lose all 11 seats. That puts the Reform Party up to 12, and the Conservatives would then be down, of course, to 15. And they'd still be the largest party, joint with the localists, assuming they keep all their seats as well. So there's not much that's going to change, but Reform can still obviously give the Conservatives a bloody nose if the Tories sort of decline restarts, because they're sort of in a purple patch at the moment where it seems like they may be coming back up. I'm not convinced yet. We'll wait and see. Obviously, the by-elections are starting again next week. Subscribe and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, because we'll be doing the results video, of course, on Friday next week. But I'm not convinced of this Conservative upturn yet, but we'll wait and see. On to Basildon then, and this is where things get a bit more interesting. So again, electing by thirds. There's going to be 14 seats up for election. Majority here is 23 seats. As you can see, no party all that close at the moment. The Conservatives, Labour, and the Independents / the locals are all defending 4 each. 4 seats each, of course. And Reform are defending the 2 that they have. Now, why did I say it's interesting then? Well, let's just go quickly and have a look at those by-elections. So the 2 seats that Reform have are by-elections. So let's just go and have a quick look. So these are the 2, St Martin's and Wickford Park. And you can see Reform obviously won them both, one off Labour, one off the locals. And they came in and got 44% in St Martin's and just over 40% in Wickford Park. So good, strong results for them. Labour actually only down 3.2 in St Martin's, but I reckon there was maybe a little bit of tactical voting because the Greens were down 9. So I think Reform managed to convince over a lot of the old Labour vote, and the Green vote kind of went tactically to Labour to try and keep Reform out, and obviously didn't work. The Conservatives were down 7 points. And in Wickford Park, where it's the locals, they were down 25 points. And this is what I mean. I said there in Epping Forest, sometimes that local vote just swings quite heavily behind an insurgent party like Reform, which is what happened, is what has happened here, clearly. They were down to 25 points. The Tories were actually up 6 here, and Labour were down 16. So, look, 2 very strong by-election performances from Reform. They've got to defend both of these seats this year, which I think they'll successfully do. But these give us a very good insight into what might happen in these other wards of Basildon. Now, look, we have no real data on Reform outside of these 2 wards in Basildon, outside of those by-elections that we had. So we're kind of flying blind. But look, Labour have got some really big vote share majorities going into this election in May 2026. 76% really in Fryans they got. Pitsea Northwest, they're up at 60% of the votes. Pitsea Southeast, almost 50% of the vote again. So look, they had strong numbers, but bear in mind, I'm expecting Labour to have an average decline of about 20 points in their wards. Basically, if we after the election, if we average out their declines, I reckon there'll be about 20 points, and that might even be a conservative guess at the moment. Such is the catastrophe and the crisis that Labour are in. So look, it's highly possible that these very large vote shares can be overturned by an insurgent party like Reform. Obviously, in a place like Fryans, they'd have an awful lot of work to do in order to do that. But it's not outside. It's not unthinkable. There's got the Independents down here also doing very, very strongly. Independents, they've got all 3 seats on both of those wards. They'll probably hold there. And then you've got the Conservatives, who seem to be sort of mostly up against the Liberal Democrats up here in the north of the constituency, in the council. The Greens providing a bit of pushback to the Conservatives up in Billericay East as well. But look, I think this whole area has swung very heavily to Reform since these elections in May 2024. So just don't be surprised to see Reform sort of come out of nowhere and put up strong numbers into the 40s and win a number of these wards like they have done in those 2 that we just saw. Rochford then is electing by thirds as well, 13 seats up for election. Majority here is 20 seats. So again, you can see no party really all that close at the moment. So just before we get into it, the Conservatives, the Independents, and the Rochdale District Residents Group are all defending 3 each. What's interesting here is that the Rochdale District Residents Group that I just mentioned, they were quite critical of the Conservatives, apparently, based on some digging that I did. They were very critical of the Conservatives, but then decided to go into cahoots with them, and they run the council. It's Conservatives and the locals, or the Rochdale District residents, who run the council. So I think a lot of what happens in Rochford depends on what happens to the Conservative vote. And we mentioned this in that last video, didn't we, looking at the southeast. If the Conservative vote holds up, then perhaps there's not all that much changes. But if the Conservative vote does not hold up, if the Conservatives see big declines here, does that also rub off on those Rochdale district residents for going into cahoots with them? Are they kind of tarnished by their coalition? That's going to be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. Again, similar to what we mentioned a minute ago with Epping, there was 4 UKIP councillors here in 2016 as well. Obviously, this whole area, this whole part of the world, the Thames Estuary, was a very fertile region for UKIP. And like I mentioned a moment ago, obviously Reform are doing far better than UKIP ever did. So I think perhaps that nudges us in a direction of how this might go. I think Reform, again, stands to gain pretty well in Rochford. And when we come to this ward map, particularly out here in the east of the council, there are some pretty slender margins. I mean, the Independents won here by 1 point over the Conservatives. The Conservatives won in Roch North and Rural by 2 points. Roch South, the Conservatives won by 0.2, literally by a hair. So there's a lot of areas where Reform can sneak in and win on a fairly low vote share. In all fairness, this one split between the Conservatives and Labour very evenly, actually not that low with 40% of the vote. But these other areas, you can sneak in and win on a pretty low vote share. Outside of that, again, you see a close battle in Hockley and Ashington. Independents pretty strong in Holbridge there. The localists about 12 points ahead in Hockley. So I think there's a few areas where Reform could sneak in and win. Again, this whole area has swung very, very heavily behind Reform since the general election. I know we've not had by-elections out here to see it, but I expect Reform to do very, very well. Again, obviously, electing by thirds limits the scope very much of what can happen, but I expect Reform to pick up a handful of seats off of the Conservatives, but also potentially off of this Rochdale district residents group as well. Now, in the very same part of the world, just south of Rochford, is Southend-on-Sea, and they are electing by thirds, but only because the rewarding has been paused. So there was supposed to be new wards coming into play here in Southend, but that's been held up or paused for some reason. And so they're going back to their normal schedule of electing by thirds. So there will be 17 seats up for election. Majority here is 26. Labour currently the largest party, as you can see, on 19. And Labour will be defending 6 seats. Conservatives will be defending 5. Reform will be defending 1 of their 4. And the other 3 will be independents. So, again, I mean, it's a broken record, but it's so swung so heavily behind Reform, this part of the world, that it feels very likely that they will do very, very well indeed. 6 Labour defences, you have to think they will lose most of those, frankly. And again, a lot depends here on the Conservative vote. Does the Conservative vote hold up from 2024, or is there a bit of a collapse? And if there is, then I think that will be mostly to the benefit of Reform, who I think can gain off of both parties here. So 6 Labour defences, 5 Conservatives, 11 seats in total. Obviously, they've got the one, Reform have got the one themselves to defend. Look, I think it's very likely Reform will get into double figures in Southend at the end of after this election. If you live in this area, by the way, down in Essex, let me know what you think. Always interested to hear your comments, of course, and you guys who live local always have a better insight than I do, but definitely feel that Reform can improve their numbers quite significantly here in Southend. And again, just coming to look at the numbers down here in Southend, look, again, Labour have got some decent margins here in the wards in Southend, but I just don't think anywhere's safe for Labour. I don't think there's anywhere to hide. I think that the bottom has just totally fallen out of their vote, and they're just collapsing across the board, really, in all regions. So I don't think anywhere's safe for them. As for the Tories, again, like I say, it's really difficult to say at the moment whether their vote holds up or not. We have to wait and see what happens with the Tories between now and May, because if they pick up, then this is the sort of area where they're going to at least hold, and if they have a very good night, with respect to where they are currently, very good, then they may even be net gainers in places like this. But that is a hell of a turnaround for the Tories if they manage to pull that off. Very quickly on Brentwood, electing by thirds again, 13 seats up for election. Majority here is 20 seats, and you can see the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats both quite close as it stands. Conservatives are defending 7 seats, though. So once again, a lot depends on what happens to the Tories. Do they here hold most of their seats, or do they lose out to the Liberal Democrats? If the Liberal Democrats can, put their foot down here, then obviously they have a very, very good chance of getting majority on this council and running it. How do Reform do in Brentwood? Obviously, they've only got 1 seat at the moment. There wasn't the UKIP candidate or UKIP member here in 2016 like there was in some of these surrounding councils. I suggest this is probably an area more where the Liberal Democrats have a chance to get that majority. And at this stage, I'd probably say that would be what I think might happen for the Lib Dems to win 3 seats. The Conservatives. Off the Conservatives, I think is not unlikely. So yeah, Liberal Democrat majority is quite likely in Brentwood, I reckon. And we'll keep a keen eye and see what Reform do. Like I say, the whole of Essex has swung very heavily behind Reform. So I just expect them to kind of blitz their way through all these regions we've just looked at. Hence the sort of title and thumbnail for the video, really. I think this could... it's not going to change the colour of the map because of the electing by thirds. Which is kind of unfortunate from a Reform perspective, but still it'll be a significant impact on the night. And I suppose continuing the theme of depending on the Conservatives' fate between now and May is Harlow. We'll look at Harlow. Conservative majority at the moment. Harlow is electing by thirds, 11 seats up for election, and a majority is 17, so bang on the 17 that the Tories have. Is it likely the Conservatives hold all of their seats and maintain that one majority? I have to say at the moment, no, I don't think that is likely. I think even with their slight bounce they've had recently, that would still only be good for them to hold. Well, they're defending 6. So, they may well hold 3 or 4, but that wouldn't be enough to defend that majority, and that might be a bit generous saying they'd hold 3 or 4. Labour also defending 5 as well, and again 2 UKIP here in 2016. So again, another area where I think Reform can do very, very well. And if that Conservative vote continues to fall again, if this bounce is temporary and they start going backwards again, I think it's another area where Reform can gain off of both parties, and gain quite significantly therefore. Again, electing by thirds, so they're not going to be running the council. But if they can pick up 3 or 4 seats off the Tories and 2 or 3 or even all 5 off of Labour, then it's going to be a very good result for them, isn't it? So Harlow is going to be an interesting one to see. It's a Conservative majority, obviously. Like we said, in the southeast, it's quite extraordinary, really, looking at this map. And only having, in this case, 2 Conservative majority councils to look at. I mean, this is supposed to be, again, another Conservative heartland, and you can see, again, the troubles for the Conservatives go back a lot further than just the last 2 years, 18 months. Leaving Essex behind, then we'll move across into Broxbourne in Hertfordshire, and here we are electing by thirds once again. 10 seats up for election with a majority of 16 seats required for a majority. Now, the Conservatives have 25 seats, and they're defending 7. So the Conservatives will be running Broxbourne, no matter what. Because, of course, the worst case scenario, the Conservatives have a collapse and lose all 7. They'll still be in 18, so they will be running the council with a majority. Reform also are defending the 2 that they have, and Labour defending 1 of their 3. But I do think this is an area where Reform, again, have a very, very good chance. And, of course, with Broxbourne being in Hertfordshire, we have some data from last year's local elections, which was for Hertfordshire County Council to look at, and that makes for quite interesting reading. So, we're looking now at the map, the wards for the divisions for the county councils, Hertfordshire in particular. Now, bear in mind, these divisions do not match up to the wards, so these are not the same areas, but it's the best sort of data most recent data we have to go on for the area. Now, Reform beat the Tories in Goffs Oak. They got 42% of the vote, the Conservatives 34%, so they won fairly handsomely, about 8 points in it. They also won in Flamstead End and Turnford, much closer. They only won here by a point. But just to show that Reform were able to beat the Conservatives in Broxbourne in that election last year, which means when we go over to the 2026 ward map, then we see that in the Goffs Oak ward for Broxbourne Council, so different to what we just looked at, but in the same part of the country, the Conservatives here won with 58% of the vote, so they got a very commanding lead, but we've seen that Reform can beat them here. So I think there's definitely opportunities for Reform to beat the Conservatives here. Flamstead End, I believe, actually is the seat. The seat up for election is the one that the Reform are going to have to defend. So you can see previously the Conservatives got 60% of the vote here. So let's see what happens. Reform obviously have got this seat by defection. Will they be able to hold it in a defence against the Conservatives, who had that commanding lead last time? We'll have to wait and see, but we've seen, again, they could do it at the county council level. So I would expect Reform probably will win here. The other one that's interesting to look at is Waltham Cross, which is one of the Labour ones, or the one Labour one that's being defended, actually. They got 57% of the vote here previously and beat the Conservatives by a pretty handsome 30 points. But just flipping across to that 2025 ward map again, and you can see that actually the Conservatives won Waltham Cross, but the Reform were very close attendance in second place, just 4 points behind them. So look, again, these don't match up. Things are slightly different between county council voting and for the local district council. But again, another area of significant opportunity for Reform, I reckon. So again, look, if Reform can gain at the expense of both parties, they could do very well. Now they've got to defend their two as well. They'll need to hold on to those two, and if they don't hold on to them, then they've probably not had as good a night as they were hoping for. But assuming they can hold on to those two, and again, if they can take maybe 4 off the Tories and beat Labour and Waltham Cross, then they're going to be up to about 7 seats, which would be, it's not going to, like I say, because of the thirds, they're very limited in what they can do. But again, it's about giving a bloody nose and proving that they can win. And again, I think that's what they have to go and do in 2026. Welwyn Hatfield is electing by thirds, funnily enough. 16 seats up for election. Majority here seats needed for majority is 25. You can see it's quite evenly split here between sort of Labour, Lib Dems, and the Conservative Party. The Liberal Democrats are defending 5, and Labour are defending 5 as well. There's an interesting little dynamic in Welwyn that we're going to have a look at in a sec. Again, we've got data from 2025's county council elections, which we're going to have a quick look at first. Similar to what we just saw, it's basically that Reform can win here. Now, Hatfield East, they won on a very low vote share of 27%, but you can see how evenly split it was between them, the Conservatives, and Labour, but they can win there. Welwyn Garden City South, they won with 33, well, literally bang on a third of the vote, winning by about 5 points. And then Hatfield North, Labour won just by 2 points, ahead of Reform in second place as well. So just to prove the point that Reform already have shown that they can win votes in this part of the country. Now just looking at the 2026 map or the ward map for 2026, and Hatfield East falls into one of those sort of regions roughly, and you can see that Labour won here with 42% of the vote previously. Well, Reform just won here last year, so this is an area of some hope for Reform, I reckon. And Hatfield Villages is kind of what looks like Hatfield North in the electoral divisions. And again, Labour here won with 41% of the vote. But Labour, in the election last year, 2025, this was the one where Reform were in second place, about 2 points behind. So Labour are going to come under a lot of pressure from Reform in these areas in Welwyn Hatfield, I reckon. So once again, very good opportunities for Reform to make gains at the expense of Labour. What I think is interesting is that I think, once again, there may be a bit of Liberal Democrat versus Reform head-to-head as well. At Pear Tree Ward, there was a by-election on the day of the local elections last year for the county councils. There was a by-election here in Welwyn Hatfield. And you can see Reform came very, very close to beating the Liberal Democrats. They're only 4 points behind, under 4 points actually behind. So look, it's only one ward. But it's interesting. I just wonder in some of these wards where the Liberal Democrats have got less than 40% of the vote, maybe Reform can make some gains on them. And now we've said in the last video, when we're looking at Portsmouth in particular, that there is going to be some areas where it is a Liberal Democrat versus Reform little battle. Now, this isn't, the council as a whole isn't, but I wonder if some of these wards may well be. And it'd be an interesting dynamic to keep an eye on, how well Reform do against the Liberal Democrats. Now, I have to admit, I think I've been a little bit guilty of, on our by-elections, when I see a Liberal Democrat defence, generally speaking, if I see Reform standing, I sort of think they won't have much of a look in. They'll probably come second, but they'll be quite a long way behind. And in all fairness, that does tend to be quite accurate. But there are certain parts of the country where I think Reform can put the Liberal Democrats under pressure, and perhaps Welwyn Hatfield is one of them. If you're local or you have better knowledge than I do, please get in the comments and let me know. Let us all know. But yeah, I think that might be an interesting thing to watch out for. Moving on, Stevenage is also electing by thirds, 13 seats up for election, with a majority being 20. Labour are defending 10, so even worst case scenario, Labour will be running the council with a majority of 1. So, and again, look, it's going to be very bad news for Labour. I mean, you've got to be pretty queasy as a Labour councillor coming into this set of elections. And look, Reform obviously have their 2 already. They've won a by-election in October last year. They got 40% of the vote, beat Labour in Roebuck. And I think the writing's on the wall for these 10 Labour councillors, basically. I think they're going to struggle to hold on to a lot of them. They've got a very large margin in Sheppel here, which is maybe one of their best chances to hold on to a seat just by virtue of the fact of how far ahead they are. But like I've said, just do not write off Labour having cataclysmic fall-offs in their vote share, with the Reform Party and the Green Party being the beneficiaries of it. I'm not saying that will happen here, but just don't write it off. I just don't think we can necessarily say that definitely won't happen. Yeah, I think it's going to be pretty bad for Labour and Stevenage. But worst case scenario, they will still be coming out the other end in control by virtue of the fact they've got that many councillors already. And as you can see, as I flick through here, they do have huge majorities here in Stevenage in some of these wards. But like I say, I don't think anywhere's safe for Labour at the moment, and I can see these being overturned. We're going to very quickly just blitz through 3 councils in this region now, just because I'm cognizant that it's going to be a long video anyway, and I don't think there's too much to say on these 3. St Albans, it's going to stay Liberal Democrat. Keep an eye on the Greens. Look, they've got 3 seats already. If we go across to the ward map, you can see they in there. Just keep an eye on the Greens. I think they might well do quite well. If they, whether or not they can take it to the Lib Dems is another matter. Obviously, Labour is their main prey, but they may well be able to pick a couple off of the Lib Dems if the Lib Dems have a little bit of a decline. But that's going to stay Liberal Democrats. Three Rivers is a bit of an interesting one. It was Liberal Democrat majority after the 2024 election, but they lost 2 by-elections to the Conservatives in Abbott, Langley and Bedmond, if it ever works. There we go. They lost 2 in 6 months to the Conservatives. So that's going to be an interesting little dynamic to keep an eye on. If there's a little bit of a Liberal Democrat collapse in Three Rivers, maybe that changes, but it's electing by thirds, so it's limited into what can change, but just keep an eye on that. And then lastly, Watford, it's going to stay Liberal Democrat because they've got such a big majority. Just don't sleep on reform in Watford is all I'll say. You can see they sort of stood, you know the story. If they stand in 2024, keep an eye on it. They got 11% of the vote in this ward in Watford in 2024. There's a couple others where they stood at least. So yeah, just keep an eye on reform in Watford, but it is going to stay Liberal Democrat majority because they got such a big majority anyway, and electing by thirds again. So that's those 3. Now, Milton Keynes is the first one in our video today that is going to be a whole council election. So all seats up, which is very bad news for those 30 Labour councillors, of course. But that said, I think Milton Keynes could be very, very close. On the Nowcast, and I know I try not to use the Nowcast for these videos because I know they're not directly comparable to local elections, and it's just a prediction anyway. But on the Nowcast, it is very, very close in Milton Keynes. It's a 3-way tie, basically, between Labour, Conservatives and Reform in Milton Keynes Central. And you can see the Greens on a not insignificant 15%. And in Milton Keynes North, it's the same, basically, slightly different order, but a 3-way tie between Labour, Con and Reform. And again, the Liberal Democrats, the Greens on a not insignificant 15% of the vote as well. Why that doesn't exactly match across, where you can see in both those constituencies, the Liberal Democrats are not really in the running, behind the Greens in both. And yet on the council, they currently have the second most councillors. And this is what I mean. There is a disconnect between general election voting and predictions and all that stuff and local elections and how things actually pan out. But all to say, I think it will be a very, very close result in Milton Keynes. Now, with all seats being elected due to rewarding, Labour will lose a majority, almost certainly, because the majority is 29, and they're not going to, nowhere on God's green earth are they going to defend a 1-seat majority in the state that they're in. I think the result will be there'll be 5 parties represented rather than 3. I think the Reform will pick up a number of seats at the expense of Labour predominantly, and also I think the Greens will pick up a number of seats as well. As to who will be the largest party, well, I suppose the Liberal Democrats are in the best place to be the largest party if Labour have a big fall off from 30 seats, which is very, very possible. But considering the fact that they are actually slightly ahead in that Milton Keynes Central Nowcast constituency, perhaps they have a hope of not having such bad declines here as they're going to see elsewhere in the country. But either way, it's not going to be a Liberal Democrat. It's not going to be a Labour majority. It's going to be no overall control. Who will be largest party? We'll have to wait and see. And Reform and the Greens will both be present on the council by the end of the election. South Cambridgeshire is also a full council election, but there's not going to be much changing here, I don't think. To be honest with you, The Liberal Democrats will have majority, need 23 seats. They've got 35 at the moment. Look, again, we come across to the 2025 map from the county council elections, and frankly, as you can see, the Liberal Democrats just own South Cambridgeshire. I mean, look at that yellow on the map. It was just, and they will again, I think, dominate this area. Look, I mean, some areas like here that they're winning with fairly low vote shares and just squeaked ahead of the Conservatives, but they look, you just see they dominated the whole of that county, and I think they'll do the same again in 2026. On here you can see even in 2024 they dominated it really. I don't see any real reason to think that's going to change. They got some big numbers back then as well. So, yeah, the Liberal Democrats are going to win South Cambridgeshire, almost certainly. It'll be interesting to see, though, actually, what happens between the Conservatives and Reform. So I think the Lib Dems will win most, if not all, of these areas back. But looking at 2025 map again, you'll see in most of these areas, the second place was split very close between the Conservatives and Reform. Not too much in it between the two of them in second place. The Conservatives generally having the advantage. Let's see what happens. Have Reform put their foot down a bit more and they've overtaken the Conservatives to be the second place party? Or has this Conservative sort of comeback really happened and they're going to stretch out their lead on Reform? Either way, can one of those two benefit at the expense of the other to put the Liberal Democrats under a bit more pressure? That would be the interesting thing to see. But South Cambridgeshire will stay majority Liberal Democrat. What will not remain majority is Cambridge itself, which is currently a Labour majority and won't be after this election. It's electing by thirds, but the majority is 22, and as you can see, Labour have 23, and Labour are defending 10 seats. And once again, there is no way on God's green earth that Labour are able to defend a one-seat majority when they've got 10 seats up for election. It's not going to happen. And of course, I think here it's going to be the Green Party. The Green Party are going to stand to gain the most from Labour here. Obviously, they've got their little their wards already here, the Greens. But you can see already they're putting up numbers in 2024. In all fairness, this one, Liberal Democrats were second. Excuse me, my voice is going a little bit here. The Lib Dems were second in Castle with the Greens on 15%. But even in the Greens are going to pick up votes off Labour, and it may well be that in places like this, the Liberal Democrats are able to benefit from that. But you can see in a number of other places, the Greens were not that far behind Labour already. They are going to punish Labour in these places. We've seen it already in a number of our videos. So Cambridge is not going to be Labour majority. The Greens are going to have a much more significant presence on the council. What did I say? Labour are defending 10. So will they lose all of them? Potentially, they might do, and they'll be down to 13. They'd still... the Liberal Democrats might be the largest party actually, if that were to happen, but probably likely Labour will still be the largest party, but much reduced down from their 23, and it's going to be no overall control, is my prediction for that one. As for Huntingdonshire, again, it's a full council election here as well. Majority is 27, so I'd say unlikely any party gets that. You can see the Tories are the closest, and they're 9 off. I think. When I had a quick look at the wards for Huntingdonshire, the interesting thing, and you'll probably notice these two funny coloured ones with no data, these were unopposed Conservatives, so no one ran against them, which is why there's no data, and they're that funny green colour. I think, again, there's a chance that the Greens actually punish the Tories. Like we mentioned it now, and this will be the third video consecutively, where we've spoken about that affluent, middle-class, white British person living in 95+% white British parts of the country, so they're not kind of affected by mass immigration, living very comfortably financially. They seem to like voting for the Green Party, and I think that, you can see here the Greens did very well. I think Reform will probably stand in most of these wards, just the assumption being that's what they did in 2025, so I assume that's what they're planning on doing in 2026, which might dilute the vote slightly as well. But yeah, look, the Greens put up some decent numbers in 2024 in these Conservative wards, so let's see, can they make up ground, particularly in this one, Alconbury, can they make up ground on the Conservatives there? But yeah, I don't see too much changing here actually. Again, a lot depends on the Conservative vote. If it holds up, I don't necessarily see too much change. If it doesn't, then yeah, the Greens may well pick up some seats and the Liberal Democrats may pick up some seats. I'm not sure about Reform in this part of the country. Let me know what you think. Do Reform stand to gain in Huntingdonshire? I don't know. We've had no by-elections. There's no data to go on. So I would say this is more sort of your Lib Dem Green area if the Conservatives fall off. Peterborough is another council electing by thirds. Majority here is 31 seats. Labour are defending 5. Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, Independents, and Peterborough First, local residents group, they're all defending 3 each. I mean, again, it's not going to be good for Labour. They're currently the largest party. I don't think they will be at the end of this election, most likely. Well, I say that, in all fairness, they'd have to probably lose all 5 for that not to be the case. But again, I think Reform will do well in certain parts. The Greens, again, I think will do well here in Peterborough at the expense of Labour too. And again, what happens to the Conservatives? We have to wait and see. I mean, in these areas, I know we said it a lot in the last video, but a lot really hinges on what happens to the Conservatives between now and May. If they really collapse again, then obviously that's going to be to the benefit of Reform most likely. And maybe to the Liberal Democrats as well. If they don't, if they sort of maintain the kind of momentum they've had, then maybe they hold on to what they've got. But yeah, it's going to be no overall control anyway at the end. Peterborough, no one's going to be controlling this council. And we'll have to wait and see who the largest party is. Now, apologies, it's out to the right of your screen. I can't move the map any further across. So apologies, it's a bit off-centered. It's triggering my, whatever you want to call it. Norwich is another one that's going to be very, very bad for Labour. Electing by thirds, but majority is 20, so they're 1 shy at the moment. 13 seats are electing, and Labour are defending 7. The Greens are defending 5. Now, look, you can see already the Greens on 16, majority of 20. I think it's very, very likely that the Greens end up controlling Norwich Council. If we go across to our ward map and go across to Norwich over here, look, where they won in 2024, they won pretty convincingly, with pretty good scores over 50%. So they've got their little areas already, and I think they're gonna creep up on Labour and overtake them in a number of wards, to be honest with you. So Greens stand to gain. They only need 4, like I say, to get that majority. Don't write Reform off as well. Reform in a by-election last year came within 0.1% of beating Labour out in Bowthorpe, and this is one of the wards it is up for election as well. So one would expect Reform to probably win here, but if the Greens really surge at the expense of Labour, they're only 12 points behind Reform themselves in this result. So, maybe the Greens could win this one. But I think Reform will probably win a seat or 2. But it's the Greens who I expect to really benefit. And like I say, if they can successfully defend all their seats and win at least 4 off of Labour, which I think is not unlikely, then they will be controlling Norwich Council. So my prevailing theory on Norwich is it will be Green-controlled, Green majority council. Ipswich elects by thirds. Majority is 25. There's 16 seats up for election, and Labour are defending 13. So Labour have a lot to lose here. They're very exposed in Ipswich. Look, worst case scenario, they lose all 13. They still got that 25, so it will be a majority council, Ipswich. But again, I mean, we're coming back into this part of the world again where Reform are picked up a lot of support since the general election. Down here, we've got no data really on Reform all that much. Look, they stood here in 2024, though. You know what I say when you see Reform popping up in 2024. Keep an eye on it. Look, Labour, they had some good results in 2024, but like I say, nowhere safe. There's also quite a few that are fairly close too. So Labour stand to lose pretty heavily in Ipswich. I'd say, like I say, they're defending those 13. I think they'll lose most of them. Again, don't sleep on the Greens here either, probably in some. I expect the Greens to do quite well in a couple of wards too. But it will be a Labour majority just by virtue of the size of their majority going into it. But again, probably going to not be pleasant. You'd be pretty nervous as a Labour councillor going into this election, I think. And lastly, because it has been a very long video, if you're still with us, still watching, thank you very much for staying here. My voice is just about clinging on here at this stage. Colchester, it elects by thirds. There was supposed to be rewarding happening, but it's been paused, so just electing by thirds as per the normal routine. Majority here is 26, so the Conservatives are the closest. They're 7 away. The 17 seats up for election, the Conservatives are defending 6, and Liberal Democrats and Labour defending 5 each. I don't think much will change here in terms of control. It will be no overall control, I imagine. And again, let's keep an eye on Reform, keep an eye on the Greens. And again, a lot depends on that Conservative vote, doesn't it? With them leading in terms of seats on the council. If that Conservative vote falls off, if they collapse, you imagine it will probably go to Reform. Labour will lose a handful of their 5, if not all 5. I mean, I keep saying Labour will lose all their seats. I mean, it sounds extraordinary, but I think the rout that has happened in Labour's vote is so substantial that I just don't think it's unlikely for them to lose every seat that they're defending in a number of these councils. If you've been watching the by-election videos, you know everywhere that Labour defends recently, they lose, and they lose quite handsomely. Not generally speaking quite close. They quite often finish in 3rd place in those seats where they're defending. So it seems very, very difficult to put a case for Labour defending seats. Obviously, they will hold on to a handful, but just in this stage, it's very difficult to sort of back them defending anything, really. So Colchester will remain no overall control, and let's see what happens to those Tories, basically. And that was a remarkably long video, but it pretty much wraps up our regional overviews, really. I will go and do a quick video in the coming days or weeks that just mops up some of the areas, the council we haven't looked at, because there's not really much going on in the region, like the southwest, for example. You've got Plymouth and Exeter, and Cheltenham, but there's not much else going on down in the southwest. So we'll look at those and just quickly go through some of those. But yeah, we're ramping up towards those 2026 elections now. So if you haven't already, please do like this video. Greatly helps the channel, and subscribe. If you've come this far in the video and you haven't subscribed yet, you're a hero. Please do subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Like I said earlier, we've got the by-elections. They're making a return next week. Only 2 to look at, but they're back nonetheless, so make sure you're there for that. And yeah, just to reiterate what I've said a number of times, very excited about this year, very excited about these elections, excited to do the live stream with you guys on election night as well. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you all on the next one.